Today we're talking about union made, and in particular about how unions have made this country what it is today. Many people take for granted that the kind of work life they have, the kind of home life they have, the kind of community they have is just something that's always been there. That's not true. If we look at the union movement in America, we know that many of the things that we take for granted were actually brought to us as a result of union activities. And many people don't even understand what a labor union is. So let me just go through this real quickly. For those of you who don't, and for those who do know what a labor union is, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's basically a trade union organized around a group of workers to unite and make decisions about conditions affecting their work. Labor unions strive to bring economic justice to the workplace and social justice to our nation. So they play a very important role. There are over 60 unions representing about 14 million people throughout the United States right now. Union members have collective voice regarding pay and wages, work hours, benefits including retirement plans, health insurance, vacation, sick leave, tuition reimbursement, those kinds of things, and about working conditions, in particular about safe working conditions. Workplace health and safety really was pushed very hard by the unions, and most of the workplace safety rules that we have were actually a result of union demands, not as a result of benevolent employers. Ways to balance work and family are also something that unions strove for. The 40-hour work week, vacations, paid leave, sick leave, all those kinds of things. The best ways to get work completed and other work-related issues were also things that union members promoted because they had to do it. And they would oftentimes tell management, hey, look there's a better way to do this. Why don't you listen to us? We actually do it. Unions work like a democracy, and if you're familiar with democracies, which I hope you are, they hold elections for officers to make decisions on the behalf of the members, and they give workers more power on the job. A local union is a locally based group of workers with a charter, usually from a national or international union. And so they work with the kinds of rules that are established and the standards that are established across the country. I have the good fortune of knowing from my own experience about unions. But since 1983, there has been a decline in union membership. Unions back in 83 were about 17 or maybe 18 million people. It's fallen to about 14.8 million people, or about 10% of the workforce. It used to be about 20% of the workforce. So we know that there has been a decrease in union membership. Now, there is also now a new trend that's taking place if you've been paying attention. And partly this is a result of people feeling as if they're not getting paid enough, that they don't have benefits, no retirement, no sick leave, that they can be fired at will, those kinds of things. So we know that, for instance, teachers groups, which is one of the largest unions, have been making more and more demands and defining things in contracts. We also see that food workers in particular, all across the country, are doing the same thing. Food workers have become the manufacturing equivalent of the 1980s. And as we've become a service industry, there's more and more people working in the food industry, but they're not getting paid very much. $10 an hour does not take care of your family. So the $15 minimum, for instance, wage has been one of the things that's talked about, but they're also looking at benefits, things that unions in the past were involved with. The other thing that's happening is in education, at university level and at medical centers, unions are becoming involved in demands for working conditions and for other kinds of guarantees that their jobs are going to be protected. And all of us are aware of the fact that artificial intelligence, robotics, is reaching into many occupations that used to be labor intensive. And so unions are redefining the whole workplace again, and there's an interest or a trend in union membership once again in this country. And that's how usually unions form. There's demands out there. People feel as if they're not being heard, and unions are formed. And so let me talk with a couple of union members here that I've got the good fortune of knowing over the period of time. First of all, John Montgomery. John was a member of a labor union, federal employee. He's now the chairman of the Midland Progressives. Midland Progressive Group is a group that promotes social justice as well as other kinds of issues throughout mid-Michigan. And we have Tom Knopp. Tom is a former labor leader.
Broadcast union.
Broadcast union, okay. Right. Let me start over here with Tom. Tom, if you don't mind, maybe you can tell me and the people who are watching why you think unions are a benefit for anybody in the workplace today.
It levels the playing field is the easiest way to say it. The CEOs, the corporations hold all the cards. They handle all the money. They handle all the benefits. If one person walks in unrepresented, it's very easy to say no to a decent demand. If you are organized, then it puts everybody in the workplace on the same level playing field with the bosses. Since 1975. Productivity has steadily gone up in the United States across the board, but wages have stayed the same. So as people are working harder, they're not getting the money. Now the CEOs and the corporations are. It's your average CEO makes about 300 times what your average worker makes right now. So that, in my opinion, is not fair. You've got the people who do the work and the CEOs, yes, they've got a responsibility, but the folks who actually do the work should get the benefits of the fruits of their labors. Okay. So that's where the unions come in. Also, you mentioned the safety aspects. I don't know if you're familiar with a shirtwaist factory fire. That was one of the big ones in New York where it was a sweatshop. They had locked the doors. A fire broke out and they lost hundreds of workers. That was one of the first ones where they came in with worker safety. So it's definitely worker safety, worker standards. And even if you don't belong to a union in an area, the unions automatically bring up the pay and benefits in the area. So even if you're not in a union shop, a union place, you will benefit, as you mentioned, the 40-hour work week, the 2 consecutive days off, lunch breaks, just basic workers' rights. So. But if you're in a union, you have an active way to actually try to better your work environment.
Yeah, and we talk about factory fires. They still exist in other countries. Pakistan, India, sure. These things happen there where hundreds of people die in a fire because the doors are barred and it's a sweatshop kind of condition.
That's why we have OSHA.
That's why we have OSHA. And OSHA wouldn't be here if it wasn't for unions.
Right. Child labor laws.
Child labor laws.
You know, it was common back especially with the textile industry. 7-year-old kid working, instead of being in school, he's on a machine. And
John, how about you?
What I'd like to say is that there is no downfall into being a member of the union. You know, there are several different ways that employers can get rid of employees when they want to cut people from working. And one of the things they use is the personnel management system. So here you are an employee, you're doing real good, you're getting high performance plans, and all of a sudden you're targeted, they want to get rid of you. All of a sudden they start using the performance management system. Then you don't have any representation because you don't know the law. They put you on something, what they call a performance plan, or an abbreviation called a PIP. You're out of work, you're gone. They fire you, right? And that's the way they can weed you out because you didn't have any representation. I was talking to Tom before off camera, and we were talking about how unions shouldn't be political. It should be all about your job, all about providing for your family and protecting your job. Yeah. So if you want to take it and be stupid, and not allow any representation, that's on you, because stupid equals fired, because that's what you're going to be if you don't have any representation. And also, Tom and I were talking off camera about who represents you, union stewards, union presidents. It's important to have somebody that represents you that know what they're doing, okay? Because most of the time, what I have seen is that sometimes the union presidents can be in the back pocket of management.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, because corruption can take place anywhere in management and can take place in unions. Now, we hear a lot about corruption of unions, and whenever that takes place, it hits all of the media, and I think those people who are anti-union make sure that they run every story they can about a corrupt union official or whatever. But when a CEO absconds with $100 million of the company's money or whatever, it doesn't seem to have the same weight. Why is that?
Let me throw in there that I've dealt with some unions in my previous job and in my union that had some problems. The difference is it's taken care of. All of your members have a vote, and your officers are members of the union also. And you have a different way. Every union that I know of has a set of bylaws. That says if you're the union president and I think you're doing something wrong, I can bring you up on charges. If it's found to be valid, you're gone.
Okay.
So as
You can
opposed
be
to the
voted
CEO,
out.
your board of directors, your stockholders,
Right.
can eliminate a CEO, but if they're making money, they don't care.
Right.
The union members all have the say, like you said, it's a democracy.
Right.
And there have been problems in the past. Anything that is run by humans, you got greed.
We were talking about the union dues.
Yes.
And a lot of people were saying my dues are being used badly because
for politics or
whatever.
Right.
Lobbying.
And so the folk, then you pick a reason why you should pay dues.
Yeah.
Some of them may be good and some might be bad. But the most important reason why you need to pay your dues, and Tom can talk about this, is because to protect your job, to protect your health, to protect your family, to when you get into have some problems with your employer when they're trying to fire you, you can't afford to have a lawyer, but I guarantee you, those union people are there for you, and they have a system. They have laws and rules where they can file things to help you. But if you're out there by yourself, you might be unemployed. You want to talk a little bit about that, Tom?
Yeah. If your union dues, most like the union I was in, your union dues cannot go for political. But most of your bigger unions have what they call a political action fund, political action committee, a PAC. So if you want, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, you can put money to that, but your regular dues don't go for that. Your main focus is what my members need and watching out for unfair treatment from the company, the corporation, the employer. So that's the main.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tom. And that's a real good, explanation of what unions do. Okay. Not only do they protect your job, protect your family.
One thing I wanted to get into, though, that you had just said is, I am one of the last people from my place that will have a pension.
A defined pension.
Pensions are gone.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that used to be the given. You give your employer 20 years.
Yeah.
We'll take care of you after.
And let me explain the difference between a 401k and a defined pension.
Right.
A 401k, you put your money in, and maybe the employer puts in some of their money, and you put it in the stock market or bond market or mutual funds or whatever, and you hope that when you get to the point where you need it, it's worth something. Right. And it's a roulette game. You may or may not have anything. Just recently, for instance, my generation lost 30% of their 401k. That's one reason the baby boomers stayed employed longer than they expected, because they were going to retire. Guess what? Their 401ks were probably 30 or 40% below where they wanted. So they worked longer. That upset things for millennials, by the way, and it's made a difficult situation transition-wise. But it's also one of the reasons that we have unemployment numbers so low, is all these baby boomers retired. They all retired in the last few years because their 401ks filled back up. Now, a defined pension is something where every month you get a certain amount of money, no matter what. No matter what happens in the stock market, no matter anything out in the economy, it is your money given to you as just like a Social Security check, which is a defined benefit, which you get every month. It's the same amount. There might be some inflation clause in there that adds some additional money later, but it's a pretty nice deal. But I do want to mention that for people who are now in this new generation, their dependence on Social Security is also being questioned.
Right.
Because many times what people are saying is, you don't want to be in Social Security because it's not going to be there for you. Put your money in the 401k, which of course the people in the stock market love,
Right.
and forget about Social Security. And Social Security is a law, and if you're contributing to it, you're guaranteed to receive something later. Congress has to honor that unless it changes the law. And Americans would be fools to give up Social Security.
Right.
Because before Social Security, if you got old and you didn't have family taking care of you, you basically ended up at the poor farm.
You were
someplace.
destitute.
Yeah,
You
and
were
Tom,
destitute.
Tom
Yeah.
just said something, and we know that they've had some recent court cases, such as GM, where they took away people's pensions. They lost their pensions.
Yeah.
One thing also
Or
with
they
the
were
401k,
reduced, yeah.
where people really need to pay attention to, is Uncle Sam's coming for his part.
Yeah.
So you got $100,000 in your 401k. You better have to give Sam $25,000 of that because you didn't pay your taxes.
Right.
So they get that money from you somehow. Even if you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever you are, your job is the most important thing to you.
Yeah.
You need to put beside all of those differences, okay, and protect your job. One of the ways of protecting your job is the union. Okay, you're gonna have people out there telling you, hey, don't join the union, man, or whatever, but you're gonna have to make a decision. But you need to make sure that you think about it, because when the time comes when you don't have any representation, okay, when time comes where that supervisor might not like you, you might be a victim of sexual harassment, you might be a victim of age discrimination. It is really good to have somebody in your back pocket that said, hey, this guy was a victim of age discrimination. This supervisor put together a workplace that wasn't good for him, and we can prove it. We have the evidence. So that's why I 100% support unions.
Yeah, well, I think unions are ombudsmen or representatives giving. Now I've been in management and I've been on the union side, and right now I'm just for disclaimer purposes, I am a union paying member of the Michigan Education Association.
MEA.
So I pay a monthly union due as a university professor. But I've also been in management, and we've had difficult times with unions, strikes, and I worked for a medical center where we had all the service workers worked out, left on a union strike, and we had to run the place without them for several weeks until the contract was eventually negotiated. But so I understand those things. And I can see both sides of it, I think, because of that. But I think what is missing today is a lack of appreciation for the union, and we can see that because of the declining numbers. And the question is, and I'll throw this back at you, how do people who really haven't seen the benefits of organized labor or understand its value and have been told for years by management or by political parties, because at least one political party is anti-union in this country, and I'm not going to say which one, but you can guess, because they organize and they've also supported the other political party a lot, and so there's a kind of an anti-union bias by
I
one
like
political
to
party.
answer that question.
Yeah.
In this case, you have to do your research. You can get copies of go online, because most companies and unions post their collective bargaining agreement online. After you read that collective bargaining agreement and see exactly what's going on, I think that'll help you to make a decision on whether or not you want to support unions. Also, I would like to say that most of my life I've been in management, and I wasn't able to join the union because I represented management. If you represent management, you can't join the union. And I've been in situations where that employer cared about their employees.
Yeah.
That employer negotiated a collective bargaining agreement because that employer wanted to stay in business.
Yeah.
They wanted to pay their employees right. They wanted to make sure the employees were protected. They wanted to make sure the employees had proper bonuses, proper leave, everything. So we'll say this. A lot of these employers are great employers. Okay, the company I work for, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Energy is a great government organization that really takes care of their employees. So look at those collective bargaining agreements from other unions, because they post them online. You do a search on Google, unions collecting a bargaining agreement, then you'll be able to see what unions do.
Well, you were talking about something about agreements and so forth, and it made me think about a couple things. One, unions oftentimes are involved in the demands of the worker and whatever that might be. And unions have set up trade standards. For instance, there's apprenticeship programs and those kinds of things where people have to prove that they can do the job, and eventually they get to a point where they're a journeyman or whatever, and the unions are there to kind of facilitate that process. In education, we have tenure, where after 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, you can apply for tenure, and then there's some protection that's granted with those kinds of things. Where I want to pivot with this thing is those protect jobs, but what about outsourcing to other countries, and in particular Mexico, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, go down the list, India? What role do unions play in protecting American labor jobs?
Basically, let me step in. I
No, Tom, you go ahead.
I don't want to jump in here.
No.
Basically, what you can do, what I do is, if I'm a union member, you have the power of the paycheck. You have the power of the dollar. For instance, there's a cookie manufacturer. I won't name him, but I'm sure you know there's a cookie manufacturer that moved everything from America down to Mexico. I no longer buy those cookies, and I used to. And I know I'm not going to bankrupt the company, but if enough of the union people do that,
Yeah.
they might think about it.
So I think boycotts are one thing
Definitely.
that could be done.
That's all you can do. Yeah, the only way that a union can have any voice is, okay, like your police and fire departments, because their emergency services can't strike.
Yeah.
Everybody else can strike.
Yeah.
That's where
railroad workers,
right,
airline workers,
airlines, and some teachers
and some
can't
medical
strike,
people.
and medical. That's the only thing you can do. You have to either have bad PR for companies which they don't like, or you have to be able to hurt their pocketbook, for lack of a better phrase. All the corporations understand, bottom line, is money. That's it. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but everything that I've dealt with in my past, in my 60 plus years, it's the dollar.
Yeah.
If you can hurt them with the dollar,
Yeah.
then they'll listen to you.
John,
I
what
want
were
to
you
add.
gonna say?
Thank you, Tom. I want to add to that. Also, you have to have somebody sitting at the table, knowing what's going on.
At the board level or at the
Yeah, you
corporate
gotta have,
level? Or,
well, at those companies meetings,
Organizational
finding
level.
out, how much money the company is making, if the company is, strong or weak, or what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's another good reason to have unions.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes to wrap this up, and I want to make sure that we get the message across as to what you think about unions, having been either engaged them in one way or another. So I'll start with you, Tom. In 1 minute, if I was a young man or a young woman in America today, and I'm looking at my future, why would I consider joining a union? Or creating a union even?
Bottom line is you have a say at your workplace, as opposed to just going along, being one of the sheep in the flock. You have an actual say. If you have a problem with the supervisor, you can take it to your steward. Your steward will take it up, and there are ways you can try to alleviate problems. If you don't, you have no say. If you're a union member, you have say in how that union is run. If you're not a member, you really don't. You're still represented under right to work, but you have an active say in it. So, it's like having insurance. It's for the problems that may come in the future. You don't need it right now, but if something happens, it's there.
You got it.
Definitely.
John?
Yeah,
Definitely.
I would say that your job is the most important thing to you and your family, and you need to do everything you can to protect it. You should not leave your job up to the whims of somebody else. You should do it yourself. Joining a union, like Tom says, give you protection, give you insurance. So I would advise anyone who's not in a union, this is my personal opinion, to join one.
Okay. Well, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about a couple things. One, that where we are today, much of the benefits to the middle class, which is vastly underrated as being a powerful force, but now is slowly leaving America. is a result of unions. And you could go back to Flint, and
Yes.
Flint, Michigan is actually probably the beginning of middle-class America. The UAW strikes there.
Flint, Chicago.
Yeah, Flint,
Yes.
Chicago.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't have
Yeah.
a middle class without unions,
No.
and most economists would probably agree with that.
I think so.
Second thing, and I think this is really important, we have a global economy now, and everybody's fighting for a piece of it or a location in it, and workers come and go. Workers, and a corporation is looking at workers in China or India or Mexico or Guatemala, Costa Rica, whatever, and whether you're an American worker or not makes no difference. Corporations are international. They don't have a allegiance to any country anymore. And so, from my perspective, local collectives fighting for a part of that economic pie are the only way that a community can ensure that a job is going to be there, or that there's going to be some economic future for the people in that community. And I think, what Americans have to realize is that we can go from being the richest country in the world with a large middle class to the richest country in the world with most of the people living in third world conditions. It can
Exactly.
happen.
Exactly.
And most people don't realize it. And unless there's somebody there advocating for workers, and it could be the union, and it could be a political force, it could be a political party, but somebody who's advocating for grassroots, for the community and for the people in it. Over time, profit making is going to move slowly away from allegiance to a community to allegiance to a bottom line.
Right.
And I think that that's just the way business works. Business works for profit.
Right.
And there's a tug there from communities at some point. And if the union isn't there to remind board of directors and shareholders that they have a responsibility to balance their profits against the benefits of America, America becomes sold to whoever wants to buy it. And we see that now. We see how many corporations have basically been sold off. I mean, Budweiser is a good example. I'll use it as an example. Mm-hmm. The King of Beers is owned by a foreign government corporation. It's not an American company anymore.
Right.
And they may decide to close all the Budweiser plants in the United States and make the beer somewhere else, in Belgium or Mexico or whatever, and we'll still be buying this beer,
Right.
but it's no longer made by American workers. And that
Right.
can happen overnight.
Right.
And that's not to pick on Budweiser
Right.
or to say that they're bad or anything, but that's just an example of how international corporations form, and how, unless you have local representation, there's no reason to keep the plant in St. Louis or whatever
Right.
open anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
You can build
Yep.
a new one in Mexico.
Yep.
Right.
All right. So I appreciate your sitting in on this and thinking about this. Again, union made. You think about that. America has been made by unions, and we wouldn't have many of the benefits that we have today if it wasn't for union activity. But in a modern age, unions have to change, and that also means that people have to take an interest in unions again as a way to demonstrate their needs and to collectively bargain with those people who, as Tom had pointed out, control the wealth, the benefits, all of those kinds of working conditions. And let's face it, one person is not going to influence a large corporation to give them any of those benefits. But all the workers in that place, or majority of them, will certainly have some influence. And that's happened time and again. It's an ongoing thing that's churning all the time in America. So thanks for listening in to Union Made.